Episode 3, Chapter 2, Yours Truly, Intro. Hello, media mites and mavens. My name is James Human. This third audio cast will introduce one of the two protagonists in my gay tale, Yours Truly. It is a brief description of my birth lottery placement. In the debate of whether we choose the family into which we are born, I would argue the negative perspective, and why should become fairly apparent. Whether that's a win or lose, I'll leave it to the reader to decide. But lucky me, my arrival was followed by an identical twin brother, an event that was more challenging than celebrated for our parents. They were both of Tom Brokaw's greatest generation and were woefully unequipped to step up to the challenge. I believe those who survived World War II, both men and women, were horribly disserviced by the U.S. federal government in acclimating their experiences into a well-rounded standard of mental health. For this previous generation, education had never been a priority, and the intricacies of psychological examination as a part of one's overall health was more terrifying than enticing. They perpetuated a generational stigma that affected their children as well as themselves. With their wartime horror stories having been all too terrifyingly physical, an interior mental examination of those recent unforgettable experiences became something of a selfish indulgence, a luxury, and any end result was thought dubious, if not fictitious. Totally unaware of any possible consequences, they began booming out babies. My experiences as an individual born into that succeeding generation are detailed in this story and are shared as consequences of that unfortunate stigma. Should you be interested in contacting me, please click on the website image. It's www.jlhoman.com, located on your screen. And thank you for your time and consideration. Before my professional theater began, I worked several menial jobs. One was serving drinks in the cabaret room of Brothers and Sisters, a happening theater bar on New York City's Restaurant Row in the mid 1970s. Nightly, I enjoyed hearing the vocal talents of Julie Wilson, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Marcia Lewis, DeJamin Bartlett, and Danny Fortis, among many others, while being introduced to a catalog of songs I'd never heard. One memorable song was Irving Berlin's recitative that he wrote for Ethel Merman in the Broadway musical Annie Get Your Gun. Dolores Gray sang an abbreviated version for her nightclub act in that dark, dank cabaret room. The song recounted getting lost in the darkness of his arms and finding her way. And in that loss, she realizes what she's found. Security, if only for the night. Validation, love, encouragement. Those lyrics stopped me in my tracks. I thought, wait a minute, those words sum up my philosophy of life. Gay men all over the world are falling into each other's arms. Why shouldn't we all get lost? Being lost was a big theme in my life, but I wasn't sure I was finding anything, or would. Now, admittedly, I'm a huge hug junkie from an early age. Is there anything sexier than getting lost in the darkness of another man's arms? And what could possibly define enough of that pleasure? What young gay men in New York City were to find in the darkness of each other's arms, whether in backroom bars or alleys of Manhattan, in the next decade was as shocking as it was devastating. But back to our story. Getting lost wasn't necessarily a foreign concept or a frightening experience for me. I was born into a family that never loved me for who I was and in which I never felt I belonged. I endured that feeling, it seemed, from birth. Having an identical but straight twin brother only compounded the feeling of being half of a whole. I was the fat, pimply twin who earned A's and B's in school. My twin brother, Joey, was the slim jock with little focus on grades. His fifth grade report card assured our parents that Joey was, quote, all boy, unquote, something none of my report cards ever confirmed of me. Learning or unlearning the lessons he'd bring home after all his ball games was a source of considerable interest for me, with masturbation being the most significant and definitely the most enjoyable. Twindom, you see, didn't work out for us. In the mid 1980s, my twin brother told me to stay out of his life and the lives of his two daughters. What does any adult do but respect another's wishes, regardless of how hurtful they could be? Enter my antagonist. Our father never really matured emotionally until possibly when he became a grandfather. Harold Homan, yes, my father and my lover shared the same first name. Isn't that positively Greek myth material? Harold Homan was simply unprepared for fatherhood, especially having twins their first time. My father was more than a little jealous of the attention his twin sons received. The one picture of us being held by our parents shows me screaming tearfully in my father's arms. Arms, or rather being held, became something I craved as a young gay man. Perhaps the arms of my twin brother in utero helped deliver me breech on that rainy Monday morning in late April 1948. Curious. My father, who kept me on a therapist's couch for longer than I ever imagined, was one of those men Tom Brokaw referred to as the greatest generation. Like all the fortunate U.S. GI survivors of World War II, our dad returned home without having emotionally processed any of what he'd experienced in the Navy, or for that matter, honestly, processed any emotional owning of the experiences of his formative years with an alcoholic father. Almost weekly, Father would remind us that his only obligation to his family was simply to bring home a paycheck every 2 weeks. Father had an issue with showing affection to either of his twin sons or to our mother. We never saw our parents embrace, kiss, or dance around the house. I remember once overhearing Mom yell at Dad, "Go ahead, hit me, and you'll never see your sons or me again." At 4 years of age, I remember being straight-armed by him as I attempted to climb up onto his lap to give him a kiss goodnight. "You're getting too old for that kind of behavior," he grumbled, pushing his extended arm across my chest. That rejection by my father was my first indication that first, I was an individual, and second, that I was unwanted, unloved, and unnecessary. "What did I do? What's wrong with me?" I cried to Mother. "He's just like that, honey," she responded. "Never has been particularly affectionate." In later years, mealtimes became almost combative. Either at the kitchen table or the dining room table, Father enforced two rules. One, you were expected to eat everything that was served to you. And two, children only spoke when asked a question. In my early 20s, an aunt and uncle I visited in Florida explained to me that these childhood dynamics probably explained why I ate so quickly. To my father's chagrin, and with his mother perpetually pointing out what to her was a major negative of any homeowner, throughout the 1950s, we had a pitiful vegetable garden. As a result, our evening meal, served precisely at 5:30 p.m., had to include one canned vegetable. in addition to the potatoes, which were always mashed. For me, canned peas remained the most disgusting. At one meal, I refused to eat my peas and was made to sit at the table after my brothers had been excused. Until I'd cleared my plate, stubbornly, I resisted for what later seemed hours. Eventually, my father walked behind my chair, grabbed my chin to force it upward, and proceeded to stuff multiple spoons of peas into my mouth. I struggled unsuccessfully to not swallow them, and when Dad finally let go of my chin and my head dropped to its normal level, I projectile vomited those peas across the room and into the kitchen. Well, first I was beaten, and then sent to be alone on the front porch swing. Oh, the joys of mealtime. As a child, I spent literally hours on that front porch swing, rocking myself into a state of numbness, repeatedly trying to justify the overwhelmingly unanswerable question of why I was born into this family. I felt lost, unloved, and unwanted. Was I there only to become my mother's teenage therapist, obliged to listen to her heartbreaking stories of past loves and then how they or their mothers had rejected her? Throughout my childhood in this emotionally and physically disturbing family, I had a sense that there had to be more from me than what I'd found on 14th Avenue in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Thankfully, only blocks away, we had Lake Michigan. I fondly recall sitting on the shores of that lake thinking, all I have to do is get across the water, preferably in tap shoes wearing something glittering with sequins, dancing across the sparkling rays of the morning sun that led beyond the horizon. In the closet? What closet? At a particularly early stage in life, my first survival strategy was decided: get out as soon as possible. And that concludes this podcast. Please check in next week for episode 4, which fast forwards through high school and college to face the following dilemma: what was I to do with my life? Television series nightly provided people with what our futures might include, with a heavy amount of science fiction, but exactly how a person was to achieve that future was left on some cutting room floor. We were flower children searching for, quote, freedom, unquote, amid the ironies and absurdities of political demonstrations that became extremely unstructured and increasingly dangerous. Social, sexual, financial, and gender equality were being demanded by the boomers. The world, as it had been known, was changing, and we chanted. Simplistically, I had to dance. Thank you for your time and consideration. Again, thanks for listening. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance by embracing similarities and respecting differences.